Hi, this is Nacho here. Today I'll be explaining a science fiction comedy movie titled The World's End. Spoilers ahead, so proceed with caution. The story kicks off with Gary King, the main character, reminiscing about June 22, 1990, his last day of high school. Gary and his friends were excited to wrap up this chapter of their lives. His group included Oliver, the jokester, Peter, the youngest, Stephen, the smooth talker with girls, and Andy, Gary's best friend. They all grew up in the small town of Newton Haven and had been close since childhood. To celebrate their graduation, the friends decided to take on a daring challenge known as the Golden Mile. This involved stopping for a pint at all 12 pubs in town, with the World's End set as their final stop. The gang eagerly began their journey, enjoying drinks and each other's company as they reminisced about the good old days. Although Oliver got lost along the way, the others kept going. When they arrived at the next pub, they unexpectedly ran into Oliver's sister, Sam, whom the boys had secretly admired for years. From there, their night takes some wild, unexpected turns that change everything. Gary then took her to the handicapped bathroom where they became intimate, but he soon abandoned her. At the 9th pub, the gang got into a fight with other patrons and were too drunk to continue. They ended up injured and vomiting, so they missed the last 3 pubs and watched a shooting star from a hilltop. The scene then cuts to 20 years later, when Gary recounts this story in a group session at an alcohol rehab center. He describes it as the best day of his life, and a teenager in the group asks why they didn't visit the last 3 pubs. Hearing this question, Gary falls into deep thought before a sly smile spreads across his face. In the next scene, Gary decides to reconnect with his old friends and take on the Golden Mile challenge again. First, he meets Peter, who manages his father's luxury car dealership, and then Stephen, who is a construction manager. Then he goes to see Oliver, who has become a real estate agent. Everyone is reluctant to come because they know Andy won't show up at any cost since he has a beef with Gary. However, our protagonist assures them that Andy will definitely be there, prompting them to finally agree. Afterward, he goes to meet Andy, who is now working as a corporate lawyer. However, the latter doesn't seem pleased to see his old friend after such a long time. It turns out that in 1997, Gary overdosed, and Andy was forced to drive him to the hospital. While heavily intoxicated, he ended up crashing his car and nearly severed his femoral artery. Gary then abandoned his friend, who was arrested alone after a 12-hour life-saving surgery. Following this event, Andy cut off contact with him and vowed to give up alcohol. In the present, Gary invites Andy to join them on their trip, but as expected, the latter declines. Gary respects his decision, but before leaving, he gives Andy the $600 he owes him. He also reveals that his mother recently passed away due to cancer, and that he has been going through a very difficult time. Hearing this, Andy feels bad for his former best friend, and expresses his condolences. The next day, Oliver, Peter, and Stephen arrive at the train station and find Andy already waiting there. The group is over the moon, as they are seeing each other after a long time. Shortly after, Gary appears in his old car from high school, and they all head towards the town they haven't been to in 20 years. Upon their arrival, they check into a hotel, but quickly head out to begin their adventure. Next, the group arrives at their first pub, but the bartender doesn't recognize them at all, which surprises them. They also notice that the patrons and passers-by have cold expressions on their faces. Gary then orders 5 glasses of beer, but Andy refuses to drink, claiming he has been sober since 1997. He requests a glass of water instead, which annoys Gary. Following that, they proceed to the next pub and discover that it is an exact replica of the previous one, which wasn't the case before. This bartender also fails to recognize them, which confuses the group. While they're drinking, Oliver receives a call from his sister Sam, who is in Newton Haven visiting her friends. When Stephen and Gary learn of this, they begin to argue over who gets a chance to date her. It is then revealed that Stephen is still upset with Gary for sleeping with her 20 years ago. Not long after, Sam shows up and everyone is captivated by how pretty she still is. She briefly speaks with them and then excuses herself to go to the bathroom. However, Gary interprets this as a hint and follows her there. He tries to make a move on her, but she slaps his shit and kicks him out. Following this, the group visits the 3rd pub where they meet an old man named Basil. Turns out the guy used to talk about UFOs, lizards, and other mysteries. Gary proceeds to strike up a conversation with him, but the old man doesn't even acknowledge him. Confused, Gary tries to order drinks, but the bartender informs him that they're banned from this pub. Due to their time in the 90s. This forces the group to leave immediately, though Gary still manages to chuck a few drinks. In the next scene, they arrive at the 4th bar and begin drinking again. Moments later, Peter comes across a man named Shane, who turns out to be a school bully, but Shane doesn't even recognize him, despite having tormented him for years. This disturbs Peter, and he starts venting his frustration, but Gary doesn't seem to care and tries to divert the conversation. Seeing this, the group gets angry and says they're going back to the hotel. An annoyed Gary then heads to the restroom, but he forgets his phone on the table and gets a call from his mother, the one he claimed to be dead. In the bathroom, Gary tries to strike up a conversation with a teenager who completely ignores him. To be fair, it's pretty sus behavior from Gary, but it irritates Gary, so he puts his hand on the teenager, which is even worse, and quickly leads to a fight. The teen proves to be highly skilled, but Gary manages to throw him against the urinal, causing his head to explode. However, he notices that the boy is not human, as he's composed of blue liquid and mechanical parts. At this moment, Gary's friends also arrive and accuse him of lying about his mother's death. They are also horrified to see the decapitated teen, whose robotic body continues to move. Soon, more teens show up, and the men get into a brutal fight with them. After eliminating all the teens, Gary's group heads outside and tries to act normal. They then assume that the reason people didn't recognize them was because they have been replaced by strange robots, which they decide to call blanks. Regardless, the group decides to continue their pub crawl so as not to raise any suspicion. This situation stresses Andy out so much that he eventually joins his friends in drinking. In their next pub, Gary notices a man named Reverend Green, who used to sell him marijuana in high school. He quickly approaches him to request more weed. Unfortunately, the Reverend recognizes him. Gary realizes that he's human and asks what's happening in this town. The Reverend Green seems visibly nervous and says it's best if he doesn't know. Not taking no for an answer, Gary and his friends offer to help him leave town first thing in the morning, but the Reverend refuses. He then gets a call from his supervisor and anxiously leaves the pub. At this moment, Oliver, who had been in the bathroom, returns and asks what he missed. In another pub, the group notices Sam with her childhood friends who are twins. A worried Gary follows her to the bathroom to inform her about what he knows. However, Sam misunderstands his intentions and slaps him again before heading outside. She then meets her twin friends and tells them how strange Gary was acting, talking about robots and aliens. Hearing this, the twins try to attack her, but Gary appears in the nick of time and deals with them, proving that he was telling the truth. Just then, a drunk Steven appears and confesses his feelings for Sam, claiming that he has always loved her, but she chose the womanizer. This shocks Sam, but she reassures him that there's nothing going on between her and Gary. In the next scene, the gang enters another bar where a party is in full swing. They see a few attractive women dancing on stage and eagerly join in. Meanwhile, Basil pulls Steven into a storage room and explains what is going on in Newton Haven. He reveals that the shooting star they saw in 1990 was actually an alien group known as the Network, which burrowed underground and began planning to take over the town. Basil explains that the aliens eventually began abducting humans and replacing them with overly docile replicas. These copies are created using the original's DNA, which they obtain from kisses, personal items, and even saliva left on the edge of a glass. Upon hearing this, Steven panics and rushes to save his friends, who are drunk and making out with the blanks on stage. With Sam's help, he drags everyone outside and explains what Basil told him. He suggests they should end their adventure and head home immediately, but Gary vehemently refuses, and Oliver supports him as well. In the end, they head to another bar, where their old professor Shepard has been waiting for them with beer. He tries to convince them that the network is actually beneficial, and invites them to join. Oliver believes him and starts praising the professor's intelligence, but Andy is having none of this anymore. He impulsively smashes Oliver's head, and to everyone's shock, the same blue liquid and mechanical parts appear. It is then revealed that Oliver was attacked and turned into a blank when he went to the bathroom earlier. The other blanks soon retaliate by launching an attack on Gary and his friends. The group fights back and destroys some of them, but to their dismay, the blanks have the ability to repair themselves. Realizing that they can't win, Gary takes Sam away and flees. Shortly after, they manage to get to her car, which they can use to escape the city. Sam asks him to come as well, but Gary refuses, as he can't abandon his friends. He then goes to hide in a smokehouse, where he meets Peter, Andy, and Steven, who have managed to escape the bar alive. Following this, the gang decides to flee town, but as they sneak through a park, Peter is unexpectedly approached by his former bully Shane. The man apologizes for his actions and claims he recognized Peter earlier, but was too scared to apologize. However, out of frustration, Peter immediately attacks Shane and begins to beat him mercilessly. He soon discovers that Shane is a blank, but still doesn't regret his actions. Moments later though, a few more blanks appear and surround Peter, who is then transformed into one, while his friends watch in horror. Next, the remaining three continue their journey, and soon realize they must pass through pub number 10 to find Gary's car. When they arrive, Gary drinks another pint, but Andy tells him it's time to go home. However, Gary hands over his car keys to his friend and flees. Andy also follows him while Steven uses the opportunity to get his car. After fighting several blanks on the way, Gary soon arrives at the 11th pub and pours himself a pint. Andy catches up with him, and Steven also crashes the car through the wall and tells him to get in. However, Gary chooses to proceed to the next bar, forcing Andy to continue pursuing him. Meanwhile, Steven, who is still inside the car, is quickly surrounded by the blanks and attacked. Soon, Gary enters the final bar, the World's End, and notices a glass of beer on the table. However, before he can drink it, Andy knocks it from his grasp, resulting in a battle. During their fight, Andy takes off Gary's jacket and sees a wristband on his hand, implying that he came from a hospital. When asked about it, Gary reveals how much of a failure he feels like, and that his life has never improved since the night they first attempted the Golden Mile. He tells Andy that he's not like him, with a perfect job, perfect house, and a perfect wife. But the latter reveals that his wife has left him, and that he's trying to win her back. Andy then begs him not to continue with his obsession, but Gary ignores him and attempts to fill a glass with beer. However, the tap activates a secret entrance and soon transports them to an underground room. There, the two are surrounded by blanks and confronted by the network, which explains that the town of Newton Haven is just one of thousands of access points the aliens have throughout the world. Their objective is to make humans more civilized and reach a level of development that allows them to interact with the rest of the galactic community. The entity then offers Gary the chance to join them and attain eternal youth. It also sends Gary's younger version to manipulate him. However, he snaps the neck of his younger self and argues that human beings should be free and not controlled by the entity's desires. At this moment, they are joined by Steve, who turns out to be still alive. The drunken trio then continues to denounce the network's tyranny, insisting that humanity should be left to its own fate. Exhausted from the relentless argument with them, the network finally just kind of agrees to abandon the invasion and decides to retreat from Earth. "Really?" says Gary. "Yeah. Fuck it," says the network. Unfortunately, this causes a nuclear meltdown in the complex, and the building begins to deteriorate. Just when it seems the drunkards are going to perish, Basil appears out of nowhere and directs them to a ladder. They soon reach the surface where Sam has been waiting for them. The group then gets into her car and drives away, while an electromagnetic wave sweeps across the planet, eradicating all electricity. Soon after, the group ends up on the same hill they were on 20 years ago, watching from afar as their town is destroyed in an explosion. The scene then cuts to some time later, with Andy telling the story to a group of people in a post-apocalyptic London. He explains that after the explosion, an electronic blackout sent humanity back into the Dark Ages. Weeks after the blackout, the blanks resumed functioning, but they faced discrimination from normal humans. In this new world, Andy is reconciled with his wife, while Steven and Sam have started dating. Oliver Scoppy returned to work as an estate agent, wearing a football with drawn-on eyes to hide the top half of his smashed hat. Peter's blank also returned to his family and lived alongside them in place of the original. Andy then admits that he has lost contact with Gary and has not seen him since then. In the final scene, Gary walks into a pub with 4 blanks, who turn out to be younger versions of his friends. He requests 5 glasses of water for them, but the bartender refuses to serve blanks and insults them. Gary explains that they're trying to complete the Golden Mile and demands the water again. This prompts the entire bar to bring out their weapons, and the bartender asks who he thinks he is. However, Gary also draws a sword and leads his blank friends in a fight, bringing the movie to a rather confusing end. Thanks for watching Nacho's Movie Recaps. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for updates. Share your thoughts or requests in the comments below. See you next time.